Good evening. Welcome to Soni Irabor Live. Yeah, tonight we're touring the whole of Africa. You know why? Because things are happening in Africa in such a way that we really do not know what is happening. Is it recolonization concept? There was a talk about Marcus Rubio, the Secretary of State for the United States of America, speaking to the European Parliament and making some demands that seemed like recalling, things that happened way back, centuries back, up to recently. And then there is sudden interest in rare earth materials or natural resources in Africa. Beyond that, there's a lot expected of the African Union, their reaction, their pronouncements, and so on and so forth. See, African Union comprises membership of at least 54 countries. So what we're saying, therefore, is how do scholars who are Africans and who have earned their own, onions, as it were, react to some of these assertions coming from the US, coming from Europe. And then we're not even looking at the Eastern Bloc, which is China, which is also Russia. They are the main superpowers now from the other side. So the truth, therefore, is I decided to seek the opinions of Dr. Nana Adom, who is Ghanaian, and Dr. Brian. Brian, you're going to have to give your last name later on. And then we also have Mr. Magnus Oyinbe, who is Nigerian. Dr. Brian is Zimbabwean. But for now, we have Dr. Nana Adom. And Dr. Nana, how are you? You're welcome to the show. This is your second time here, I believe. And I don't know if you got my introduction and how you look at it, how you react to it.
Yes, thank you so much, Soni. I think sometime last year, yes, we had an interesting dialogue, and yes, this tonight's own promises to be very exciting. And yes, I did receive the discussion for tonight, which is an interesting one. And I want to begin off by greeting all your listeners for tonight. Good evening. Thank you all for tuning in, as always. And it's such a privilege to have you join us every evening. And yes, I think Soni is an interesting one. How does Africa react to the recolonization of the continent because of its natural resources? I think I want to begin off by saying what we are witnessing is not recolonization with flags. Is actually recolonization through contracts. And by that, what I mean is global powers are now racing for Africa's lithium, cobalt, oil and gas. We have recent instances, all across the African continent. Africa supplies raw materials but captures the least value. If you look at Ghana, you look at the Ivory Coast, they have tons and tons of cocoa, but do get if you look at what is happening with the world market of cocoa, you notice that the producers, i.e. Ghana, La Côte d'Ivoire, get very least value in return. For myself, what we're witnessing again is almost like we're mirroring the 19th century extractive system without territorial occupation. So in the so the colonialists are not physically taking territories, but we are losing out. Several African countries are losing out in several ways. I think if, for myself, if if only Africa, if Africa only exports raw materials, if for the green revolution, let's look at, for example, let's again look at the green revolution, then the green transition becomes the new colonial project. And I'm talking of the green revolution here, I'm talking of green energy here. And if Africa does not position itself very well, then it could become the new colonial project. Thank you.
Yeah, well, yeah, I see the way you reacted to it, and you were very careful in actually deciding whether it's a form of recolonization. Well, if I may put something across to you, it appears that they seem to be dictating to, African, heads of state, the way Africa should go. And not many African heads or leaders are deciding for Africa. They're more like deciding, if I should say, and I hate to say it, it's as if they're deciding for themselves, for their pockets, maybe reluctantly for their individual countries, So this is why my reaction and some people's reactions against all of these things is because of the way, for example, Africa seems to be divided into different segments. The AES, or the Sahel states, led by three, presidents. Well, that would be Traoré, and that's Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. The way they decided that, no, Africa must be for Africans, the other Africans are not thinking like that. This is why I tend to share my thoughts along the way they are thinking. What do you think about that?
Yes, Soni, thank you very much. And I think what is happening now across a number of African countries is very concerning in that you have debt trap diplomacy. For instance, that's China's strategy. China offers huge loans, significant loans for infrastructure projects, road, railways, ports, and all of that. However, when African countries fail to pay, then China takes control of critical assets. A typical example is Sri Lanka, the country Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka lost its Hambantota port to China after defaulting a loan. Again, African countries like Kenya, Zambia, Angola are at risk, of the same fate. And again, through Western economic control, France still controls the economies of quite a number of the Francophone countries, and obviously that was part of the reason why there was a huge upsurge within the Francophone Francophone countries. Then again, you also talk about land and resource theft. Foreign countries buy African land for agriculture, whilst some African countries struggle for food insecurity. Nigeria, for instance, there is the issue of Nigeria and other nations, selling their oil and gas and minerals, but remain. There are some portions that still remain extremely poor. Then again, you've got political influence and military control as well. France, as I mentioned again, France still controls. They do have several military bases in Mali, Chad, Niger, and a few other countries. I think now to citing all of these ongoing challenges within Africa, I think tying it down back to your question, the upsurge we recently, last year, 2 years ago, we witnessed with a number of African countries is because the youth and the current generation are tired of the narrative. They've seen the narrative being repeated over and over, and nothing seems to change. We do all the big talking, but seldom do we implement the practicality, to turn the narrative around. And unless African leaders are intentional about changing the narrative, we are still going to witness a number of these. I use the example of, for instance, Sri Lanka having to Sri Lanka, China having to take over the Hambantota port in Sri Lanka. And if you notice, a few years ago, there was a massive uproar, massive upsurge with Sri Lanka when the masses revolted against the government because they felt that we've got the natural resources, yet it's been narrative upon narrative. So the answer to your question, Soni, is that there has to be the intentionality of current African leaders having to change the narrative and not just doing the talking, because we risk, as I mentioned earlier during the start of my submission, we risk now having slipping into being colonized, but this time not via territory, but through contracts, through the green energy revolution. And until we change the narrative and take our place, it could pose some very dangerous scenarios for us.
Okay, you say it could pose some very dangerous. Well, let me put it this way: dangerous is an understatement. When you see the way U.S. America has positioned itself against the Bight of Benin, which is also the Gulf of Guinea, that's the entire coastal region of Nigeria and West Africa. Then you also look at the fact that the Sahel region is in bed with Russia, and China is waiting in the wings. Let me not stammer too much on that. The fact is, I'm using this West African analogy as an example that may be future battleground for the rest of the global interest as far as natural resources are concerned. Because the Sahel region is saying no, they've actually sent France away. Okay, what would you say of China and America? Rubio has already said, let's go back to the old game of being, which to me sounded like partitioning Africa all over again. And I like the fact that you said, no, they are using contract-based approach. Don't you see the risk? We'll just take a short break. I think there's just a little bit of technical problem. We'll take a short break. We'll be back after the break. Okay, so welcome back. We have three guests. One is Dr. Nana Adom, and then the other is Dr. Brian. Dr. Brian has been on actually, but I think we're trying to sort out the technical aspect of it. And then the third, which is a Nigerian scholar, is Mr. Magnus Onyibe, who is a political analyst, international commentator, and also a columnist. So he's going to join us. And very soon, I hope, because of the limited time, we're not going to lose focus or lose time, because we need their contributions. It's very, very important. So, Dr. Nana, how are you, sir? Thank you. I hope you don't mind me calling you by your first name, Dr. Nana. Yes.
That's fine.
Right.
That's fine.
Yeah. Actually, before we went on break, I had actually asked you, okay, let me put it this way. Are Africans united? Straightforward.
That's a very interesting question. I think going back to the words of Dr. Kwame Nkrumah at the eve of Ghana's independence, he made a very profound statement, and he said the liberation of Africa will be impossible without the united front of Africa. And I think one of the things that Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, Julius Nyerere, and the great Pan-Africanists, one of the things that they really sought to push at the onset of independence struggles was to make sure that we had a united Africa. I mean, looking back at some of the speeches and some of the policies that they pushed then, they were very particular and very, very interested to see Africa united. Unfortunately, that hasn't materialized over the years. Is Africa united? No. We are very, 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 very disjointed, and the West, for the want of a better word, has used our lack of unity as a vehicle to push the agenda against us. We have serious language barriers, very, very serious language barriers, currency variations. We don't have a united front goal policy that an overarching united Africa policy that we desire, that we are all working towards to achieve. Rather is, very individualistic. Is Nigeria, Ghana, Zimbabwe, South Africa, and as a result, so it almost feels like there is no clear pathway, clear language, clear policy that is being spoken as one Africans. That in itself has raised a lot of challenges. I mean, I do remember going by recollecting a powerful quotation by Francois Mitterrand, former French president, in 1957. He made a profound statement. He said, without Africa, in fact, without united Africa, France will have no history in the 21st century. A very powerful statement. Without united Africa, France will have no history in the 21st century. And if you look closely, one of the tools, one of the mediums that the West have used to the disadvantage of Africa is our not being united. For instance, France introduced the CFA, right, as for all the countries that they colonized, and that in itself became a very powerful tool because the CFA was pegged to the French francs, and it became a tool of manipulating and still controlling. It became a controlling tool. Unfortunately, if you look at Africa, we all have different currencies, like I mentioned earlier. Language barriers, country barriers.
Okay, yeah. Let me quickly bring in Brian. Brian, hello, are you there?
Hello.
Here we have you now.
Yes, I'm here.
Good.
Thank you. My apologies for the technology.
How do you pronounce your last name, Brian?
From Zim.
How do you pronounce your last name?
Yes. Maguranyanga.
Say that again.
Maguranyanga.
Okay. I love that, Maguranyanga. Okay. All right. Now, you heard your colleague, Dr. Nana Adom, and he said a lot of things about Africa. The last question I asked him, which he gave a very beautiful answer to, is whether Africa and Africans are actually united. And from all indication from his answer, so far it doesn't appear so. What do you have to say about that? Let's take it from there.
I do agree with Dr. Nana Adom concerning the lack of unity across Africa. I think we have to take it back. I think historically, unfortunately, and through colonialisms, we have been divided as a people. And instead of finding institutional mechanisms and platforms for us to reconnect and rebuild ourselves as a unified force, what we've done is we have really tended to align ourselves fundamentally with the colonial powers. And what is very interesting is when you look at Secretary of State of the U.S., Marco Rubio's statement at the Munich Security Council, he made a very important plea and call to the European Union and the West to unite for their political interests, for their economic interests, and to drive their agenda. And drawing from that insight, it is imperative that us as Africans, we find a way to unite ourselves, leverage the AU platforms and the different regional blocks that we've created for the advancement of our people, for our sovereignty, and also to allow ourselves to leverage the natural resources that we have for the good of our people. So if the West is talking about unity and advancing their strategic interest and national interest in particular, why aren't we doing the same? So I think that when you look at ECOWAS, for example, the separation of the alliance of Sahel states speaks to the fragmentation and the fracture and the rupture that's occurring in Africa. And that's very concerning, because a house divided will not stand. A nation not unified, a continent not in unity, is subject to manipulation from external forces. So we have to take the cues from what Secretary of State Rubio is saying to the West. And we have to have the same conversation in Africa to say, how best can we build a cohesive, unified force for the advancement of our people and our continent?
Yeah,
So I really agree with Dr. Nana that we are divided. And because we're divided, we cannot stand. And that's why we're open to exploitation from all the global powers, because we've allowed that to happen.
the real problem now is we are divided, but we are even getting further divided by the introduction of BRICS currency, which is not yet been named, and is likely to be yuan, and then the dollar, which has been a dominant currency, international currency, for more than 60 years, maybe even 80 years. So if you really look at it from those points of view, you see that we are not only globally divided between East and West bloc, we amongst us are not even thinking or singing with one voice. I mean, the AU is so silent, unfortunately, because whatever they say doesn't appear to carry any water. United Nations doesn't seem to be very involved in all of these things. So back to Dr. Brian, what do you think will be the way forward before I get back to Dr. Nana? Dr. Brian.
The African countries, first, I think I need to go back to what Rubio also said. It's very interesting that I'm divided in terms of how I'm approaching this. He's calling for the unity of the West. And who's calling for the unity of Africa? I like the point that you've just raised, that us as Africans, we have to be united. And how do we do that? I think we do that by recognizing that our collective power is the critical asset we have. And once we leverage that, it will allow us, one, to define our economic trajectory, our political trajectory, and our security interests. Because as long as we don't have a single voice and a united front, we are subject to division. Yes, you've spoken about the BRICS, but when you look at the BRICS, it's literally dominated by who? By China, right? By
Only
Russia.
South Africa is there, and Ethiopia, maybe.
By India.
Yes, go ahead.
And these are the countries with the power. So we find ourselves literally between these shifts in geopolitics, where the powerful countries are looking in terms of how best do they leverage their power for the advancement of their own people and their own strategic interests. But for us, I think I've come to question, why is it that we have not envisioned in Africa, which is a powerful continent, which is a force to reckon with globally? The Canadian Prime Minister warns us. He says, if you're not at the table, you're going to be on the menu. Unfortunately, we're allowing ourselves to be on the menu. And hence, we're going to be eaten. They have a free choice in terms of choosing exactly the diet, the meal that they want. And this is the wording that's coming even from Marco Rubio, saying, if you're not part of us, you're going to be an enemy. Choose your side. But for us, we have to be strategic in terms of how we position ourselves so that we're able to leverage our influence through our natural resources, through what we have that they desire, to be able to bargain relationships that are beneficial to us.
But they don't seem to recognize our sovereignty. I mean, America especially from what Marco Rubio said, there doesn't appear to be enough recognition of the sovereignty of each African country and Africa as a continent. Dr. Nana?
I think it's because they have seen a common enemy and now using that as an excuse. And by that, I'm going to throw them up more like, take for instance the Congo. Soni, if you look at the Congo, for instance, Congo has been at war with its own minority since independence. Isn't that sad? It took up until recently the president of the United States, Donald J. Trump, to I think recently last year, the Congo and Rwanda to sign a peace treaty, and it took President J. Trump to bring them together to sign that peace treaty. And this war has been ongoing for years. Within Congo, as I mentioned, the several minorities, have been fighting. And I think, and like Dr. Brian, and I tied this into Dr. Brian's submission earlier, that as long as we remain disunited, it obviously gives the West a greater tool, right, for them, to use as an excuse. The opposite is the opposite of my suggestion is equally true. If we within Africa we remain united, starting from within, and by within what I mean, take for instance Congo. We have several ethnic differences, several ethnic fighting, cleansing. In fact, to date, up until recently, for instance, in Ghana, there had been an ongoing battle between two minorities in the north, and it took the king of the Ashantis to recently come mediate and try to bring them together. And there are little pockets of these which translate into the bigger picture. So little pockets of these in Ghana, little pockets of these in Nigeria, little pockets of these in Congo, little pockets of these in Rwanda. They are dotted all across the African continent, which clearly gives the West, gives China and the bigger boys a reason to even use as an excuse to push the agenda. I think a potential solution would be for us to start breaking barriers within, within us. For instance, the Congo is a classic example. I think we need to start breaking those barriers that has existed since independence, and we need to see each other as not enemies, but as together fighting for a common cause, together working to achieve one dream, one vision. And I think it will have to start from not even at the country level. I would suggest that it will have to start from the ethnicity level. There are so many ethnic backgrounds and barriers within Africa. To date, I use Ghana as an example, right? There are certain tribes that wouldn't want to, that do not get on with certain tribes, so much so that it even eats into national dialogues, national conversations. And I think that would be a good starting point, that we need to break these barriers at home. They say charity begins at home. Break these barriers, then we can translate this into national dialogue conversations. Then we can then extend this into regional and regional African conversations.
Okay. All right. We'll take a short break now, but when we get back, we're going to ask the question whether there is enough political will on the part of African leaders to ensure that they can unite and move on. We'll be right back. Yes, this is Soni Irabor Live. Welcome back. I have Doctors Brian and Nana. Yes, Dr. Nana Adom and Dr. Brian Maru. Look, Dr. Brian, forgive me. This whole thing, I have to go to school to learn your name
It's a mouthful.
properly. Okay. But the truth is there enough political will in Africa to ensure, some kind of unity amongst us, because being African unity in name is not enough from what I am seeing. We're so easily gullible to be so disunited and divided and anyway, excuse me. Is there a political will? Dr. Brian.
Yes. So in terms of political will, I think that's a very interesting question, which makes an assumption that there is a desire for us as Africans to unite. I'll present to you and to us as Africans that the political will is limited. Historically, we've had leaders during the anti-colonial times when we're fighting as defined a common enemy, which were our colonial occupiers, and we had a vision to unite our people. So we rallied our people, we rallied our countries behind a common vision, which was freeing our people from the bondage of colonialism, the liberation of our people. However, we stopped when we gained independence. We assumed that everything was going to be well. Unfortunately, this is a new realization and a new reality that independence on its own does not guarantee a unified vision for countries as sovereign nations, but also for the continent as a whole. So we are allowing ourselves, even as the citizens, not to drive the agenda where we hold our politicians, our leaders to account, to define what freedom for Africa is and what it entails. We have not, I've had the conversation with Dr. Nana as well in the past, that we have not come up with a new vision of what an Africa and an independent, free Africa is. And Europe is reconstructing their vision. And Marco Rubio presented that case very compellingly, whether we like it or not. He was making a case. So he was calling on European leaders to pursue their agenda. We need, as Africans, to call on our leaders and our people to pursue our agenda. What is the post-colonial agenda? What is the liberation agenda? How do we empower our people? And that political narrative, once we've framed it as Africans, it will allow us to energize our people, to energize the continent, to advance our interest, politically, economically, socially, including how we leverage our economic and natural resources for the advancement of our people. So is there political will? Very limited political will. I think the ones who liberated the continent, since they're long gone, the new leaders, I'm not sure if they've really framed their will to advance Africa to another level.
Because I heard you say reparation just now. Dr. Nana, what do you have to say about the political will?
Yeah, well, I agree with I do agree with what Dr. Brian's submission. Okay. I think we don't have enough political will. There's limited political will. For a start, I would even want us to look at the language barrier. China and India are often referenced as a good replicas, for leading and breaking barriers. So if let's look at China. The entire country of China speaks one language, whereas if you come to Africa, we speak, there are several languages, thousands of languages. I think one school of thought by the African Union has been that Swahili be an ideal language for a united Africa, considering it is the most widely spoken indigenous language. But then again, Swahili only has some 140 million speakers, which is less than 15% of the 1.2 billion people on the continent of Africa. So they are, assuming if you want to break the language barrier, is there the willingness to speak one language? I doubt, because like I said, I use the case of Swahili, which has been one of the clue of thoughts for us to speak one language. But even with that, even within the East African bloc, if the Kenya, Uganda, within the East African bloc, for instance, Swahili spoken in Tanzania as against Swahili spoken in Kenya is deemed, the Tanzanian Swahili is considered the better Swahili as against Kenya. And this is right within the East African bloc. Even within the East African bloc, there is a bit of a classification as to the best Swahili. So I think it only adds on to say the willingness, there isn't enough willingness for us to break the barriers, and until there is an intentional effort, and I've only just used the language barrier as one, what will be, if you look at also other pointers like different economic values, then again, there's also the school of thought that it could lead to a pathway to tyranny. So all of these adds up, I believe one way or the other, adds up to us having very little willingness to push the United Africa agenda.
Well, if I may just give my own opinion as an interviewer in this whole matter, it sounds a bit far-fetched that Swahili, that you say is spoken by 140 million people, that's a bit small a number for the entire continent. That's one. Number two, it might take a number of years, maybe 50 years, to achieve a possibility of the whole of Africa agreeing to speak Swahili. Okay, if we say we cannot achieve all of that, what about the main borrowed languages like English, French, Portuguese, and so on and so forth, that could be, at this point in time, used as a basis for pushing the agenda of oneness? All right. We will go on a short break very soon, but please bear this question in mind. The next one will be, how plausible is it that Africa can actually look against itself and say, come on, we've got to get out of this mess? Because from the way I see it, from where I'm sitting, we're in a mess. But we'll be right back after the break. Well, straight to the point, my question, my guests, Dr. Brian and Dr. Nana, my question is, as we approach the final stage of our interview or show, do you think Africa has the onus? Do you think the leaders are willing to do it? We talked about political will earlier. What about you scholars? You used to say a lot of things. You used to write a lot of them. But now, your brains should be back home, not, I don't want to say elsewhere. Let's look inward. What can we do to salvage Africa from itself? Dr. Brian.
I think, first, let me comment on what Dr. Nana just said concerning language and linguistic. I think, unfortunately, we focus so much on our ethnicity and the diversity of our ethnicity as a barrier to our development. I think, for me, that's an excuse. What is important is the language of what a developed, unified, powerful Africa is, and the one that has control over its future or her future. I think that's very important. And we can see this even when the Western world is defining how it seeks to capture the global South for the advancement of their strategic and national interests. So as Africa and our politicians, the important question for them is, what language do you need, not the linguistic and not the ethnicity, to define Africa? Because Africa is not homogeneous. It's diverse, but we have a shared history, which is we are Africans, and we need to develop with good resources. And that is the basis for our rebuilding ourselves. And we cannot allow ourselves to be recolonized. Unfortunately, we tend to recolonize ourselves in the mind by accepting the Western paradigm without contextualizing what we have to do for our people. So that is my starting point. What is it that we need to do as Africans, looking internally? First, we have to clean up our own mess.
Dr. Nana.
We have to clean up our own mess first.
Yes.
We assume that once we're in power, we'll do whatever we want to promote the interests of the political economic elites, limited, not necessarily the majority. That's on us. We've allowed our political and economic elites to capture resources without necessarily leveraging those resources for national development. So we have to look at resource nationalism, and I'm not talking about nationalization. I'm talking about how do we leverage the natural resources we have for our growth, for our development. That's number one. Then number two, how do we limit externalization of our security to the global powers, and allowing ourselves to be this theater of operation of the global powers, Russia, China, US, EU, to play on the continent and our futures. It's on us because we have given them that platform, and we need to reclaim our space. How do we do it? We have to think strategically. We have to leverage our institutions, and we have to strengthen our institutions. Unfortunately, we have allowed the demise of our institutions that are supposed to be strong, and we have allowed the emergence of strong men, not strong institutions. Hence, we are controlled by individuals in countries. They manipulate, they build a network of patronage, which doesn't benefit the majority of people. So it's on us as Africans. Number three, we have allowed ourselves to be so much in debt and indebted to the global powers, including China. We may say we're trading one colonial power to a new form of a colonial power through the economics. And the reality of borrowing beyond sustainability. If you look at Africa right now, we owe more than 170, 180 billion.
Yeah. Okay.
US dollars.
Right. Let me give
We are literally mortgaging the future of generations to come. So it's on us.
Yes.
Right?
Okay.
Number three, why aren't we unlocking the entrepreneurial value of our people and our resources and use that for our development? We have to literally question ourselves and stop blaming the West and the Chinese because they're being strategic.
Let me give Dr. Nana a chance. We just have less than a minute to go. Dr. Nana, what do you think? Based on what he has said, if you have anything to add, please go ahead.
Yeah, I love it. I love. Thank you, Dr. Brian. That's a brilliant submission. I think last time when during our last session, I did mention about a model that I think a practical model that I think potentially we could learn a few lessons from, and it's the MPH MPH model from Singapore. So Singapore, as you know, way back in the 50s, when countries like Ghana, Nigeria, Zimbabwe, even had independence. Singapore was a third world country. Some of the photos, some of the videos, if you see, I mean, it's shocking that Singapore used to be like that. But they turned the narrative. And I think for me, one of the things that they did was they used they call it MPH. Number one, that's meritocracy, pragmatism, and then honesty. These were the three pillars with which Lee Wan-kun decided to turn the narrative around for a country that was third world country. Look, honesty, number one, meritocracy in that Lee Wan-kun said, look, if let's get let's make crime punishable at the highest end of leadership, so when, for instance, somebody, if a politician does something, or that commits a crime, put it this way, make crime highly unattractive at the higher level. Honesty, right? Let me go.
We have less than 30 seconds to go.
Oh, okay. Pragmatism. Let's get the right people, right, to do the right jobs, and not based on relationships and friends and all of that. And then honesty. Let's be honest, right from the least to the highest. And I think for me, if we can look at, might not necessarily be the same, but a few things that we can mirror in changing the narrative across the motherland.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nana Adom and Dr. Brian Maguranyanga. I got your name now correctly.
Finally, Soni, you got
Finally,
it.
yes. I've been cracking my head all evening. Thank you, gentlemen. You've been such wonderful guests, and I will come again. You know me, I'm always coming cap in hand. But don't worry, not the African way. We need to really change our narrative. We cannot be used anyhow. Thank you, gentlemen. Yes. God bless you. And Soni Irabor live, ending now. Till next week, Saturday. Bye-bye.